Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm not a member of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee, and so it's my delight to say words that are so seldom heard in this Parliament. Congratulations to Murdo Fraser and, of course, the other members of his committee for what is a very interesting and engaging report. It's a report that's going to give us more questions than answers, and I think at this stage of looking at this subject, that's not too surprising. Today, I'm in my last day as the Deputy Convener of the Subordinate Legislation Committee. Indeed, it's the last day of the Subordinate Legislation Committee. But we rise phoenix-like tomorrow as the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee, and I am suitably translated into my new position as the Deputy Convener of that. So now John Mason knows at least what ex-ministers are equipped to do, since I make no claim to be underemployed or underskilled for the job that I have. I think the committee sort of gives the game away of the complexity of the subject that's before us in Parliament today, in that it spends an entire A4 page discussing what is underemployment. And I think, in honesty, a good shot, but probably the committee would agree that we probably haven't nailed it down absolutely firmly, because it isn't absolutely clear what underemployment would be. We basically rely on statistics where we ask individuals their view of their own situation, and different people will view it in different ways. First job I had when I left school before I went to university as a nurse in 1964, I worked a 108-hour fortnight, so almost anything after that is going to look like underemployment if I applied the test of my 108-hour fortnight, 12 days on, 2 days off, in 1964. So I think there are imprecisions likely to be in the statistics. Now, having said that, I think it's probably relatively clear that there is significant underemployment. Kezia Dugdale sort of gave the game away by suggesting that it was significant in 2008. Yes, in the UK, probably 2 million people were underemployed, but of course that was nothing to do with the fact that Labour had been in power for 11 years. Well, she might actually be right, because of course the stats don't go far enough back to justify a robust conclusion. But the numbers are going up, and therefore it's correct that we should be looking at what that is. Now, the committee has asked the Scottish Government to improve the quality of statistics, to look at how labour market stats could be adapted to take account of developing trends, and in particular, perhaps, underemployment. And I think that's equally applicable to the UK Government. The Office of National Statistics serves both governments, and therefore perhaps they should be asked to do some work to think about how better we can understand what is the nature of and the quantum of underemployment. We do know that employment is rising. We are now up to, for 16 to 64-year-olds, that excludes therefore me, up to 71.8%, and indeed Mr Brodie, who's chuckling in the margins as well. But nonetheless, whenever people want to work and cannot work, that is an issue we properly engage with. And I think many have referred to the fact that females are disproportionately affected. And I think that too is important for us to consider. The trends are probably reasonably informative, but even they are not robust. Lawrence Pomeroy, who was the chief engineer of Vauxhall Motors in the 1930s, said, if you have to measure an improvement, you probably haven't made one. Well, I don't think we should get too fixated about our inability to measure underemployment, because it's probably sufficiently significant we can see it without having the confidence to say it's this number rather than that number. So I think that it's big enough, although I think it was Deming who said if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So certainly as we respond to the challenge of this, we've got to have better numbers in front of us. Professor Fred P. Brooks, who wrote a book called The Mythical Man Month, posed the question, how does a project get late? And the answer is one day at a time. Well, unemployment and underemployment is very similar. It happens in little slices, and eventually you realise the whole sausage has disappeared. So therefore, the difficulties of measurement should not prevent us from considering this to be a real problem. Now, skills use. Now, that's a real corker of a question, because, of course, I don't necessarily want to use all of the manifest skills that I've built up over my long life, and indeed anyone of my age may have done. I make no exclusive claims in that regard, although I do acknowledge the plaudits from others in the chamber. But the bottom line is we all gain huge amounts of experience as we go through life, and we're very unlikely ever to have a job that can use every skill that we may have. But on the other hand, if there are skills that are of economic value that we ought to be able to deploy in the workplace, and we're unable to find employment that helps us do that, then certainly that is an issue which public policy should respond to. Ken McIntosh said a lot that I agreed with, but in relation to the balance between the benefit system and employment, I would say to him in particular, and I suspect he would agree with me on this, that rather than following the UK government's current strategy, which is to try and make unemployment less attractive, we need a strategy that makes employment more rewarding. And that's probably something for which there would be a consensus in Scotland. I will.
I thank Mr Stevenson for giving way. Likewise, I don't sit on the committee that produced this report, but as a former Deputy Chair of the Subordinate Legislation Committee, Mr Stevenson, I feel your pain in relation to those meetings. But as in terms of incentivising people into employment, I've not heard anyone mention yet reforms to the tax credit system, and a lot is made about gender inequalities in terms of underemployment. Do you think that reforms to the tax credit system in particular has disadvantaged a lot of female workers who are working part-time and would like to do more hours, and that is something the UK government, whilst the power sits at a Westminster level, that they should consider, of course, in lieu of it not being with this Parliament at present?
Another minute, Mr Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The member makes a very good point. One of the arguments always for child benefit was that that was something that went straight to the mother, and therefore gave at least a modest bit of security to the mother. And I think the tax credit system, there are some difficulties with that as well. I'll just close by talking a little bit about zero-hour contracts. One of the difficulties is I'm not sure it's a contract, because a contract has an offer, an acceptance, and something that's of value that's delivered. And I'm not sure that the latter part is met. And I suspect it probably at some point will be legally challenged. I also think we need to be careful about imagining that skills will always find a home. It's not always going to be the case. We mustn't get locked into the idea that we have to preserve all the skills that we've once had. We simply won't succeed in that. And finally, Presiding Officer, taxation. And here's a little suggestion for Westminster. Directors of companies get no bonuses if they are more than 5% of the profits of the company they work for. The trick is, if there are no profits, there are no bonuses. Maybe there will be profits in the UK, then we can tax them and collect some of the tax. But there's a little thought, incomplete, not fully thought out, Presiding Officer.